Look, I think one of the things which has become commonly understood about Brexit is that it was a mistake to think, if anyone thought of it as an event, as a single moment, whether that was the referendum or the day that we left or the day that the transition period ended, and it's not. And it was always going to be a kind of an unfolding process, and we can see, even going on at the moment, all kinds of things which are sort of continuing. We've had a long period of renegotiation of Northern Ireland Protocol, and we've got the Windsor Framework, but it hasn't been implemented in practice yet. There are all kinds of things about import controls and other things. So it's an ongoing process. But I think perhaps the most important thing to say about it is that it still remains, a bitterly contested process, and there is, still a great deal of division about Brexit. But in terms of that period since the end of the transition period, which is when Brexit really became real in terms of actually leaving the single market and and all of the institutional consequences, you could say, I think, and I argue in the book, that there's been a kind of an ongoing battle for the narrative. Was Brexit a success? Was it a failure? Was it the right thing? Was it the wrong thing? And I think it's fair to say that the battle for that narrative is not going the Brexiters' way. In other words, public opinion has shifted, really quite clearly, I would say, against Brexit.
Yeah, you give lots of stats in the book about that, and I think reading through it, sort of the frustrated part of me says, and this is where you will fight and I will maybe despair, is that, although some people who voted for Brexit may have changed their mind, like it or not, this is where we are. There is no chance of us rejoining the EU. And so without kind of putting rose-tinted glasses on it, what is the point of continually tussling about whether Brexit is a good idea or not when we've just got to get on with it?
Well, because of the fact that we're still living with precisely because of the fact that it's happened and we're getting on with it, that means that we are living with the consequences. And I think inevitably, if people perceive those consequences to be damaging, what are they going to say? I mean, what would we say in any other policy area? What would we say if our housing policy meant, this is a better example. What would we say if our schools building policy meant that our school buildings were falling away? Would we just sort of shrug our shoulders and say, well, we better not, mustn't complain about it. There's no point still going on about it. It would be a live political issue because it was affecting people's lives. And so I think it's exactly the same with Brexit. But the difference, I suppose, with Brexit compared with that example is that Brexit goes into every single policy area. It's not just confined to one policy area. And that's not a Remainer thing to say or a Brexit thing to say. I mean, if Brexit were not a huge transformational change, then why would we have undertaken it anyway for those people who wanted to undertake it? And so that's the reason. Now, I mean, whether that, I mean, you raised the question of rejoining, and you could say that the very fact that there are still people talking about rejoining is in itself kind of evidence that, and I certainly argue this in the book, that the Brexit
I don't know
kind of
whether people are, though, are they? That the sort of swathe of legal actions, the swathe of sort of parties interested in trying to stop it happening, that moment has obviously gone.
Oh yeah.
And politically, we are never going to get to a situation. I mean, I can't see it within 5 years. Maybe you can advance above 5 years and say, well, maybe the political climate's moved on by then, and so the conversations have to move on. But the fact that Brexit is still a contentious issue will mean that if Labour were to be our next government, they will not touch it because it's too much of a hot potato still. Surely the most important use of resource is getting on with it and trying to make the best job possible with it.
Well, I mean that's a question for politicians. That isn't really what the book is about. But then you then come to the question of, well, so what is the best way of getting on about it? If you say, and I agree with you, by the way, that rejoining is not something which is likely in any feasible political timescale. But then what does getting on with it mean in concrete terms? And as soon as you start to ask that question, all the old divisions will open up. So, for example, one of the things which it seems that Labour are committed to doing if they form the next government is to form what in sort of jargon terms would be called dynamic alignment about sanitary and phytosanitary regulations. What does it mean? It means that the regulations about the traffic of live animals and foodstuffs and plant seeds and so on, that the UK would align its regulations with those of the EU and commit to doing so. And that would reduce very significantly reduce a lot of the border checks and the border frictions on trade between the UK and the EU. And so we could say, well, right, that's getting on with Brexit. But people who are very pro-Brexit would say, and this is the reason why the Conservatives haven't done that, is they would say, but that means having a role for the European Court of Justice, and that violates what certainly so many Brexiters would see as the principle of sovereignty that lies behind Brexit. So the very act of just getting on with it, of just dealing with Brexit, of making the best of it, as you say, itself contains all of the divisions.
Yeah, and obviously each of those approaches, each of the policies going forward has to be debated, and there will be those that do not want to align with the EU in any way. There will be those that say, well, actually what they were doing was sensible, so we'll carry on with that, a bit like some of the trade deals which have just simply rolled over in our name rather than being associated as part of the bloc. I think that those discussions are going to happen anyway. I want to just move on briefly because we are slightly short of time.
Sure.
You write in the book that the problem with Brexit is that anyone who writes about it is almost certainly to be hotly disputed, or anything anyone writes about it is almost certainly to be hotly disputed by someone, and that is the issue, isn't it? That those disputes are part of the wider sense in which Brexit's created a culture war. And I wonder whether Brexit's reignited our taste of culture wars, and actually whether we can argue the war on woke, racial justice, transgender issues, whether that has overtaken Brexit, whether we are done with the Brexit culture wars largely and we've moved on to other areas.
Well, I mean, I completely agree that the one has morphed into the other, though. I mean, I think whenever people try to sort of describe the sides in the culture war, almost the first thing that they reach for as the kind of foundational part of the if there are two sides in the culture war, what they reach for is being put for against Brexit as the kind of foundational element of it. I think, I mean, look, I mean, in a sense, it is inevitable that that other issues come to prominence and that other issues have have an increased kind of sense. But then I still kind of come back to the thing that because Brexit affects so much, that in a sense, whether it's talked about or not, it's going to be there as a political issue. And I mean, the punchline of the book, if you like, is to say that the situation that we have at the moment is a kind of an impasse where it's very widely agreed that Brexit has gone wrong. Even very pro-Brexit people like Nigel Farage talk about it having failed.
But that's because it's not a true Brexit, according to Nigel Farage.
Exactly, they mean entirely different things by it. For some people, it's failed because it was a terrible idea and it's bad fail. For other people, they say, oh, well, it's failed, but it's because it's been messed up by politicians, it hasn't been done properly, or any of those kinds of things. And so we have kind of reached this point where, as I think you kind of implied earlier, we can't go back. We can't turn the clock back and go back to 23rd of June 2016. But we also don't have a political route to go forward either. And I think, and eventually, I guess that changes. That impasse cannot last, I think, forever and ever. But for the time being, that's where we are now. I think that's a problem because of the fact that what Brexit did was to sort of reset not just our sort of economic, but our kind of whole geopolitical strategy. And you can't really have a country which is sort of sailing off in a direction, but is too scared to talk about it.
Perhaps we should be talking about it more. I wonder whether the war in Ukraine and the pandemic has, and also apathy people are over it to a certain extent. I wonder whether that prevents us talking about it or not. Do please, listeners, get in touch and let me know whether you're still thinking about it a lot. Chris, it's been really interesting speaking to you. The book is called Brexit Unfolded, and it's been updated to look at the period since the end of the transition period in 2021. Great pleasure to speak to you. Professor Chris Gray, thank you. Good to speak to you.